Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at a really thorny, highly emotional question for you to ponder.
Oh, yeah, it's a heavy one.
It really is. We're looking at how the sheer, the brutality of nature squares with the idea of a benevolent creator.
Right.
And to detangle this, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of material for you. We've got philosophical texts, theological arguments from thinkers like William Hasker and William Lane Craig, plus biological research, including the 2012 and 2024 Cambridge Declarations on Animal Consciousness, and even a historic letter from Charles Darwin.
That's a massive, massive topic.
Yeah. So our mission today is to look at how science actually defines pain, how ecosystems function, and what theologians say about the ultimate purpose of this wild, often brutal natural order.
And just to set the boundaries right out of gate here, we are not talking about natural disasters today.
Right.
So no earthquakes, no tsunamis. We are strictly focusing on sentient suffering. So predation, parasitism, and just the day-to-day brutal reality of the food chain across evolutionary deep time.
Right. And to really get into this, we have to start with Charles Darwin.
I do.
Because back in May 1860, Darwin was observing the natural world, and what he saw actually sparked a massive crisis of faith for him.
Yeah, a profound one.
He wrote this letter to an American botanist named Asa Gray, and he confessed something deeply personal. Darwin basically said he simply could not persuade himself that a benevolent and omnipotent God would have intentionally designed I'm going to mispronounce this, the ichneumonidae.
The parasitic wasp.
Yeah, exactly, the parasitic wasp. And for those who aren't familiar with this nightmare fuel, this wasp doesn't just sting you.
No, it's much worse.
It lays its eggs inside the bodies of living caterpillars.
Mm-hmm.
And the larvae then hatch and literally eat the caterpillar from the inside out while it is still alive.
Yeah, it's grim.
Darwin also pointed to, cats playing with mice before killing them. He looked at these mechanisms and just thought, how on earth could a good creator design this?
And it's a completely understandable reaction, right? I mean, we all feel that. But to understand why Darwin was so profoundly horrified by that wasp, we first have to recognize the psychological trap that almost all of us fall into when we look at nature.
Okay.
It's a behavioral concept called anthropopathism.
Anthropopathism. Okay, let's unpack that because it seems central to everything we're talking about today.
It is. It totally is. So anthropopathism is the deeply ingrained human tendency to project our own complex mental and emotional states onto non-human creatures or even, inanimate objects.
Right.
Because empathy is a highly evolved, really powerful human trait, but it frequently misfires. It's why you might catch yourself talking to your houseplants to encourage them to grow or
begging your car's engine to turn over on a freezing morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. You are projecting a human mind onto something that just doesn't have one.
It's like feeling deep emotional sorrow for a Roomba when it gets stuck in a corner and just keeps bumping into the wall. You watch it struggle, and you genuinely feel bad for the little guy.
Exactly, because you're taking human frustration and mapping it onto, a puck of plastic and microchips.
Right.
And philosopher Michael Murray points out that we do the exact same thing with animals. When we see a fish writhing on a hook, we know that if we were in that situation, we would be in absolute existential agony.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So we project that highly complex human experience of suffering onto the fish. Anthropopathism makes animal suffering look completely indistinguishable from human suffering.
Okay, I get the psychological trap. I totally do. But I have to push back here.
Go for it.
Because a caterpillar squirming as it's being eaten from the inside out is not a Roomba.
No, it's biological.
Exactly. It's biological. It has nerves. It looks like it's in absolute agony. Are we really supposed to believe it's not? Because that just feels like we're trying to make ourselves feel better about the horrors of biology.
That is the exact tension we need to explore. And it's where the neurological science of pain completely changes the philosophical debate. Okay, to understand what is actually happening inside that caterpillar, we have to look at a framework Michael Murray developed called the hierarchy of pain.
The hierarchy of pain.
Right. He breaks the biological response to injury down into 3 distinct levels, level 1, level 2, and level 3. And we really need to look closely at the mechanics of each one.
All right, let's unpack this hierarchy then. Start us off with level 1. What exactly is happening there?
So level 1 is entirely about nociception. These are purely information-bearing neural states. It's just a physical reaction to a noxious stimulus.
Like your reflex.
Exactly. When a creature at this level encounters damage, its nervous system fires off signals that produce an aversive behavior. So flinching, squirming, pulling away. But here's the absolute key. There is zero phenomenal consciousness.
So the body reacts mechanically, but nobody is home to actually feel the ouch.
Precisely. The organism reacts to the stimuli the same way your knee jerks when a doctor taps it with a hammer. Your brain isn't making a conscious choice to kick, right? It's a closed-loop reflex arc. Which brings us to level 2.
Okay.
Level 2 adds a first-order subjective experience. This is where phenomenal consciousness actually enters the picture. Meaning the creature actually feels the pain. There's a conscious, subjective experience of physical distress.
Okay, so level 2 is the real, actual felt pain, and then there's level 3, which is where things get distinctly human, I imagine.
Yes. Level 3 is a second-order, self-aware experience. The creature not only feels the pain, but it knows that it is suffering.
It knows it's suffering.
Yes. It recognizes itself as a persisting entity moving through time. Because it has a concept of its own future, it can experience anticipation, dread, the feeling of lost dignity, true existential despair.
Wow.
Right? The crushing weight of human suffering fundamentally relies on level 3 consciousness.
So if we take this framework, right,
Yeah.
and we go back to Darwin's parasitic wasp and the caterpillar, where do they...
This is where it gets absolutely fascinating. The neurological hardware of invertebrates like insects, spiders, caterpillars is simply too rudimentary to support phenomenal consciousness.
Really?
Yeah, they do not have the neural architecture for it. They operate entirely at level 1.
Wait, so the squirming caterpillar being eaten alive is not actually experiencing suffering?
No. Philosopher Jonathan Birch refers to them as natural zombies.
Natural zombie.
Yeah, they exhibit highly complex, cognitively sophisticated behaviors to avoid damage, but with absolutely no conscious, subjective experience.
A natural zombie. That is a wild concept to wrap your head around for a listener. But how do biologists actually know that? I mean, how can a creature learn to avoid danger or squirm away from a predator if it doesn't have mind that feels pain?
It comes down to observing neural networks without a central processor. So biologists point to the nematode worm, Caenorhabditis elegans.
Okay.
This tiny worm has a nervous system consisting of exactly 302 neurons. That's it. Yet, it can learn to avoid harmful stimuli and navigate its environment. It learns and reacts, but entirely mechanically at level 1. And to make it even more visceral, scientists have observed decapitated rats.
Decapitate, you mean just the spinal cord?
Exactly. A spinal cord completely disconnected from the brain can still exhibit learned avoidance behaviors.
You're kidding.
No! If you apply an electric shock to the leg will learn to pull away faster the next time.
Wow. So the leg is literally learning to avoid pain, but obviously without a brain, there is no conscious mind experiencing that pain.
Exactly. It proves that complex, evasive behavior, squirming, fighting back, escaping, does not automatically equal a conscious mind experiencing suffering.
That's crazy.
So the horror Darwin felt watching that caterpillar was level 3 horror. He was projecting his own complex, self-aware, existential dread into a level 1 biological machine.
I mean, that completely reframes the bugs. I mean, if they're natural zombies, the moral problem shrinks a bit.
Right.
But let's move up the food chain. Because what about higher animals? Like a deer being pulled down by a pack of wolves or a seal being eaten by an orca. We've all seen the headlines about the 2012 and 2024 Cambridge Declarations on Animal Consciousness. Doesn't the scientific consensus overwhelmingly state that a huge chunk of the animal kingdom is conscious?
It does, but we have to be incredibly precise about what those declarations are actually claiming.
Okay.
Which is why Murray's hierarchy is so vital here.
Oh, yeah.
When those Cambridge Declarations state that animals possess consciousness, they are referring to level 2, not level 3.
Meaning they're establishing that vertebrates and, certain invertebrates like octopuses have the capacity to feel subjective pain.
Yes.
They feel the physical ouch.
Yeah,
But they aren't establishing that those animals share our human self-aware dread.
precisely. Vertebrates definitely experience real level 2 pain. But to suffer the way a human suffers, to agonize over your own mortality, to dread the future, to feel a sense of cosmic injustice, requires a highly developed, persisting sense of self.
And how do we test that?
Well, biologists use things like the mirror test. Can the animal recognize that the reflection in the mirror is itself and not another animal?
And most animals fail that test, right?
The vast majority fail completely. Even the smartest non-human animals, chimpanzees, dolphins, elephants, magpies, they only show minimal, fleeting forms of self-consciousness.
Interesting.
They might pass the mirror test by recognizing a paint mark on their own body, but the richer, continuous self-consciousness needed to generate existential horror is, based on all the evidence, uniquely human.
Let me stop you there, though, because if I put myself in the shoes of a skeptical listener, I'm thinking, all right, maybe the deer doesn't have an existential crisis about dying.
Yeah.
But it still feels level 2 pain.
Sure.
It is still physically agonizing. And when you look at the atheists' mathematical argument against God, they bring up the sheer volume of this.
Great, the numbers.
Yeah. If you add up billions of years of level 2 animal pain across millions of species, doesn't it equal an ocean of suffering so vast that no good God could possibly justify it?
It's a very compelling emotional image, I'll give you that. But philosophers argue that this mathematical approach relies on what's called the aggregation fallacy.
The aggregation fallacy.
Yes. Moral weight doesn't sum up like a math problem.
Wait, hold on. I'm going to fight you on that.
Okay, let's hear it.
A million bee stings is a million moments of real pain. You're telling me volume means absolutely nothing ethically. Because if I'm doing the math, billions of years of even brief pain adds up to a literal mountain of suffering.
It feels like it should work like math, I know, but it doesn't. Because pain isn't a liquid you can pour into a single giant bucket.
Okay.
You are assuming there is a giant mind somewhere feeling the whole bucket all at once. Think about the mechanics of a single bee sting. It causes a brief level 1 or level 2 pain response. It's over quickly, and the bee has no persisting sense of self to be traumatized by it. Now imagine a million bee stings happening to a million different bees scattered across a century.
Okay, I'm imagining it.
If you add them all up on a spreadsheet, do you suddenly have a moral tragedy on par with a single human being experiencing 5 years of profound level 3 existential despair, isolation, and chronic illness?
When you put it like that, no. Because those million bees never combined their pain.
Right.
They were completely isolated, fleeting events.
Right. You cannot stack up millions of brief, isolated, non-self-aware moments of pain and magically generate level 3 suffering.
Wow.
The moral weight of suffering is determined by its depth and its self-aware character, not just by biological volume. The vast majority of the ocean of suffering that the atheist calculates is actually level 1 activity, which isn't suffering at all, or brief, isolated flashes of level 2 pain. It just doesn't aggregate.
That is a massive paradigm shift. But let's look at the system itself.
Okay.
Even if we aren't dealing with an aggregated ocean of level 3 despair, animals still get hunted, torn apart, and eaten. It is violently competitive out there.
Absolutely.
Why is predation necessary at all? If there is an omnipotent God setting the rules, why couldn't the world just be vegetarian? Why engineer predators in the first place?
That is the ultimate question of ecology. And when we actually look at how ecosystems function, we find that a purely vegetarian world isn't the peaceful utopia we imagine it to be.
Right.
No. In the reality of a finite physical environment, death by predation is often the quickest, most merciful end available.
There is a really striking real-world example of this from Canada, actually. The wildlife authorities had to intervene and artificially reintroduce wolves into certain areas, specifically to hunt the wild caribou.
Yes, and it seems entirely counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Completely.
In the absence of wolves, you would think the caribou herd would thrive. No predators. But instead, without the top-down pressure of predation, the caribou population exploded. They overgrazed their environment, completely destroyed their own food supply, and began dying agonizingly slow deaths from disease and mass starvation.
That's awful.
Paradoxically, the caribou herd absolutely needed the brutality of the wolves in order to survive and flourish.
The 19th century geologist William Buckland was actually writing about this way before modern ecology mapped it out.
He was, yeah.
He argued that a predator's kill is a dispensation of benevolence, which sounds insane at first, calling a wolf ripping out a caribou's throat benevolent.
Right.
But his point was mechanical. The predator provides a sudden, rapid end. It saves the prey animal from the prolonged, lingering misery of tooth decay, chronic disease, and starvation that would inevitably happen if they just lived until their bodies gave out.
And Buckland was sneered at by modern atheist biologists like Richard Dawkins for saying that. Dawkins called it a weak rationalization.
Oh, interesting.
But modern ecology has proven Buckland was substantively correct. Predators regulate the system. Even in a purely vegetarian world, animals reproduce. They would inevitably overpopulate, exhaust the plant life, and brutally compete for dwindling food during a drought. There is no biological reality in a finite physical world that is free from competition and death.
It's almost like predation is the immune system of an ecosystem.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Think about your own body's immune system. You have macrophages and white blood cells brutally attacking, dissolving, and consuming foreign bacteria.
Right.
If you zoom in on a cellular level under a microscope, it looks like a horrific war zone. It's violent. But if that violence stops, if the macrophages stop hunting, the entire macroorganism, your whole body, collapses and dies. The brutality at the micro level is absolutely vital to sustain the life of the whole.
That is a perfect analogy. And philosopher William Hasker takes this biological reality a step further into the philosophical realm with what he calls his natural order theodicy.
Okay, what's that?
He asks us to pull back and consider what is required for any physical beings to eventually exercise free will and make rational choices.
I'm following. How does free will connect to the food chain?
Hasker points out that to be an embodied agent, meaning a mind living inside a physical body trying to learn, plan, and survive, you absolutely must live in a world with stable, predictable causal regularities.
Okay, give me an example.
You have to know that gravity works exactly the same way every time. You have to know that fire burns. You have to know that dropping a heavy rock on your foot will cause physical damage.
Right.
Without a highly predictable natural order, actions wouldn't have reliable consequences. And if actions don't have reliable consequences, you can't learn or make meaningful moral choices.
Because if the world was just a magical padded room, where every time you jumped off a cliff you floated gently to the ground, or every time a mouse was about to be eaten, God just miraculously teleported it to safety,
Right.
the physical laws of the universe would be meaningless. You couldn't learn cause and effect.
Exactly. A stable natural order, which inherently includes the food chain, energy transfer, physical vulnerabilities, and yes, pain, is the necessary price for a world that can support rational agency.
That makes a lot of sense.
Hasker argues that a world without stable laws or predator-prey dynamics simply could not support the kind of complex life that eventually leads to humans exercising moral choices.
Okay, I buy that physical laws require consequences. If we want a universe where humans can learn and make choices, fire has to burn.
Right.
But humanity is just a tiny blip on the radar. Why did we need hundreds of millions of years of dinosaurs ripping each other apart or insects parasitizing each other long before any human showed up to exercise moral agency?
That's the deep time question.
If the ultimate goal is human free will, why the incredibly massive, brutal evolutionary prelude?
This is where the theological arguments really synthesize beautifully with biological reality. William Lane Craig addresses this deep time question directly.
Yeah.
He argues that the evolutionary prelude wasn't just arbitrary filler, it was structurally necessary to build the stage.
How does deep time build the stage?
Think about the mechanics of the Earth. According to Craig, that long evolutionary process did incredibly heavy lifting. Millions of years of life and death built the complex, stable ecosystems we just talked about.
Oh, I see.
It generated the massive deposits of fossil fuels, topsoil, and natural resources that eventually made human civilization, agriculture, and technology possible.
Wow.
It developed the biological capacities like complex brains, social structures, and vocal cords that ultimately distinguish humans. The long history of nature wasn't a waste. It provided the exact environmental and biological setting required for the human drama to eventually unfold.
And it is so important to note that this isn't just modern theologians backpedaling to accommodate Darwin's timeline. This concept of an imperfect developing natural order is ancient foundational theology.
Absolutely. The Christian tradition, for example, has never claimed that the current state of nature, complete with its brutality and predation, is the final perfected state of things.
Right. The Apostle Paul wrote about this 2,000 years ago in his letter to the Romans, specifically Romans chapter 8.
Yes.
He wrote that all of creation was subjected to futility and is actively groaning like it's in the pains of childbirth, awaiting a future redemption.
It's a powerful image.
And C.S. Lewis echoed this perfectly in his book, The Problem of Pain. The theistic worldview has always been that nature is currently operating in a fractured, preliminary state. It is moving toward a final resolution.
Exactly.
Treating the current food chain as God's final, perfect draft is just fundamentally misunderstanding the theology you're trying to critique.
And understanding that theology leads us to a brilliant philosophical twist regarding Darwin's original outrage over the wasp.
I love this part. Okay, let's go all the way back to 1860, with Darwin staring at that parasitic wasp eating the caterpillar.
Right. So if we look closely at the very nature of Darwin's protest, we find a massive contradiction. He was morally outraged by the cruelty of the wasp. He felt it was objectively wrong. But wait, on a purely naturalistic, atheistic worldview, where exactly is the cruelty?
There isn't any. It's just carbon and DNA doing exactly what it evolved to do.
Exactly.
A wasp isn't evil. It doesn't have a moral compass. It's just biology executing a program.
Right. The wasp is entirely amoral. The very fact that Darwin, or any modern skeptic, feels a sense of deep moral outrage, the profound feeling that this is wrong and should not be this way, relies on an objective standard of goodness.
Oh, wow.
They are borrowing a moral framework that requires a transcendent, objective standard to judge the natural world against.
That is such a massive paradox for the skeptic. To argue that the cruelty of nature disproves God, you have to assume a standard of objective morality that naturalism itself cannot justify.
Bingo.
If naturalism is true, the wasp is just a machine making more machines.
Yeah.
Your feeling of outrage is just a random chemical firing in your brain to promote your own survival. It means absolutely nothing about the universe.
William Lane Craig argues precisely this point. The emotional force of the atheist's argument actually undermines its own premise. You cannot call the universe objectively broken unless you possess an objective blueprint of how it is supposed to work.
Right.
The fact that we recognize nature as groaning, as Paul put it, points back to a moral lawgiver.
This has been an incredibly dense, paradigm-shifting deep dive. We started with Charles Darwin, horrified by what looked like the senseless, evil torture of a caterpillar. But by unpacking the mechanics of this, piece by piece, the entire picture changes.
It really does. We learned to spot the psychological trap of anthropopathism projecting our own complex minds onto bugs. We broke down Murray's pain hierarchy into level 1 reflex, level 2 subjective pain, and level 3 existential suffering. And we saw that the wasp and its prey are operating entirely at level 1. They are biological machines without conscious suffering.
And even for the higher animals that do experience level 2 pain, we thought the ecological necessity of it. Predators like wolves are the vital immune system keeping the caribou from collapsing into mass starvation.
Yep.
The whole brutal system, with all its consequences, is a necessary physical reality to support a world where rational, embodied beings can exist, learn, and make real choices.
And finally, we saw that the hundreds of millions of years of evolution weren't a pointless bloodbath, but a purposeful prelude. It was the heavy lifting required to build the ecosystems, the resources, and the biological hardware needed for human history. When you understand the mechanisms, the problem of animal suffering shifts from an unsolvable emotional horror into a complex but deeply purposeful ecological reality.
It fundamentally changes how you look out the window at the natural world. But I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder that goes beyond biology.
Okay.
We've spent this entire deep dive looking at how our unique level 3 consciousness curses humans with the heavy burden of existential suffering. We are the only creatures on Earth that agonizingly dread our own mortality. Let's flip that around for a second. Doesn't that exact same level 3 consciousness also make us the only creatures on Earth capable of experiencing true, transcendent gratitude, profound awe, and deep joy? If the cost of experiencing our greatest, most transcendent joys is our capacity for our deepest sorrows, is it a price worth paying? Something for you to mull over? Until next time.